Can we bow our heads? Gracious Lord, thank you for providing this time for us to come together to work on the issues that confront our city. Grant us insights into how we may best solve the issues, the problems that we confront. Please grant us your wisdom and your guidance. We ask you to protect those who serve us on a daily basis, particularly those in the armed services, and for our civilian first responders. In Christ's name. Amen.
All right, y'all join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance. Oh, hold on. Sorry, they switched the flags on me.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. I knew somebody would finally say that. I have not heard that in our council chambers in a while. As I say in every meeting, the rules of decorum are in effect. Basically, that means we treat each other with respect and we treat each other like adults. Citizens' comments. We don't have any citizens' comments tonight, so citizens' comments will be closed for the evening. All right, first thing up will be approval of the minutes from the April 26, 2022 regular city council meeting. I will entertain a motion unless there's any issues with those meeting minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve April 26, 2022 regular city council meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the city council meeting minutes of April 26, 2022.
Yeah, I've got a motion. Do I have a second? I've got a motion and a second. If there's not any discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Show that unanimous. All right. Now we will move on to the first item, which is 6.1, swearing in of myself and our new council member for Place 4, which is Mr. Dion Purdy. So, and one thing that I have done in my career being a supervisor and a leader is I like to take care of my people first. So I'm going to ask that we swear in Mr. Purdy first, and then I will swear in after him. Dion, if you'll step up front. Well, you know, don't get started because there's no you person in here too. And for those of you that are in attendance, Dion not only is a member of our community, he also lives in Sonoma Verde. I myself also a resident of Sonoma Verde. We've been friends for a while. Our Justice of the Peace, Mark Russo, is also a Sonoma Verde resident, and he will be the one swearing him in today. Yeah, Mark lives right next door to us. All right. And folks, this is a Kodak moment, so if you want to come closer to take pictures of them, this is the time. And that means kids, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever's in attendance. If you want to be up here in the picture, that's up to them. Huh? He is. All right, so we've got that out of the way. Folks, we did have on the agenda 6.2, discussion and action regarding the resolution canvassing the returns for the special election. We can't do that without the official documentation from our voter administration office in Rockwall. They have not done that yet, so we won't be able to do that tonight. As soon as they do get that to us, we can call a special meeting and have it canvassed by 2 members of council. But we're still waiting on that, and because of that, we cannot do that tonight. So 6.2 is basically scrubbed for the evening. We will move on to 6.3. Consider approval of council policy number 1 and council policy number 2 that were put together by council member Tucker and city manager Rick Crowley. I will turn that over to you, Rick, and you and Dan jointly can.
Councilman Tucker, would you like to start, or do you want me to review them first? Okay.
And this one?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, the council authorized Councilman Tucker and I to work on a particular policy related to certain types of acquisitions for the city, which we did. We decided to recommend that the council develop a policy book where those broad council policies could sort of be memorialized and kept a record of. And so council policy number 1 actually establishes the council policy program. With each new seated council, such as tonight, if we had had that, excuse me, if we had had this policy in place last year, then a meeting following this one, we would have reviewed all of those policies and made a determination as to whether there needed to be any changes in those policies and readopted them on an annual basis to make sure that they stay current. So council policy number 1 generally creates a policy book and provides direction to the city secretary and to the council to help keep it current. Policy number 2 addresses the acquisition of vehicles and major equipment that are over $25,000. We've had review of both of these policies by the city attorney as well as our city accountant. Basically, anytime the council's called on to either purchase or to allocate funds such as budget those types of items that are over $25,000, the options would be provided to you for financing those by the city administrator and the city finance director. In this case, Mr. Smith, who is our contractual CPA finance director. It would give you the options and discuss the matters of should it be purchased by cash funded by the current year's revenue, by cash from reserves, or using short-term notes if the life expectancy of the asset being purchased is more than the short term of the notes, and any other financing alternatives for those which may be available at the time depending on those items. Sometimes there are lease purchase options, sometimes there are other options that may be advantageous to the city to consider. But basically, I won't say it slows it down, but it requires more information to be provided to the council at the time in which you need to make that decision. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I just want to make one comment on this, and the reason I kind of ended up thinking about this and proposing it is because I came from a business background where I had a business, and I was bringing into play the thought of equity, I suppose, to the degree that there's a burden whenever we purchase an item. The fire truck, as an example, I think was $400,000, and so the longevity of that particular vehicle will be somewhat along 10 years or so. And initially, to purchase that on a cash basis, and I think that's how it was done. And I'm not denigrating how this was purchased because we had the funds available through the grant, TxDOT, I believe. But had it been out of public funds, that would have burdened our current taxpayers. If we can, protract this out for a 10-year period, then we have those future taxpayers. I think it would just be more equitable for those folks to help carry the cost while they're receiving the service. So that was the impetus behind the proposition here to start with.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
So just two quick things. So there's a reason, and this kind of goes back to discussions that we've had at various stages, points in time. There's a reason they're called Policy 1 and Policy 2, and not the city financing policy or the second one I think is the city vehicle acquisition and use policy. By the way, I did make sure that we removed that the interim city administrator gets to sit in the fire truck and honk the horn. I did remove that from here, so we're good. But I want to remember that we're looking at a big picture here. So it's good to focus on each policy. I mean, that's obviously good, but they're policy 1, 2, 3, because what we wanted to do is have a continuing number of policies that we create to reduce the stress on City Hall. So now, like we've talked about, and I'm sure it's going to come about how much the city administrator can spend without checking, because right now, pretty much, they got to go to council whether we're going to do Charmin or Angel Soft. That just doesn't lend itself to efficiency in City Hall. So if they're going, well, gosh, we've got to put stuff like that on the agenda, and hey, have you looked into that, Shelley? What are we going to do? Because we've got to find out what council wants, if they got questions, yada, 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 on very mundane items. This is what we're now starting to do, is have policies in place so that the staff can look at those policies and like, okay, we got an idea where we're going here. We know what we have authority to just do on our own. We know authority that we can almost do on our own, but we ultimately have to take to council, or we just go directly to council. So I'm going to try to bring that up each time we talk about the policy so we remember the big picture that we discussed previously.
I just wanted to say one other thing. And that's exactly, that was the other part of what I was going to say, is that the protocol that we're setting up establishes a protocol for us to go through the process and not necessarily have to get bogged down in discussion each time. And then the other part of that I was interested in was bringing a certain level of expertise, because we're all experts in our particular field, but when it comes to financing, we may not be. And so I want to add that other layer of information that a professional can provide.
Yeah, I was just looking at the detail in this email.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Holler.
Well, and it's, like you said, it's starting policy one, policy two, then forward. It's a living, growing document that will end up being our finance policy at some point, the whole policy, but it's a living, growing document right now, because we are growing as a city to the point now we've got to have some other things in place now, because we're starting to get big, we're starting to require more things. We're starting to have to do a lot more than what we were doing when we were such a smaller community. So it's very understandable where we're going with this. So I will entertain a motion to consider, or I will entertain a motion for approval of council policy number 1 and number 2.
Make a motion to approve policy number 1 and policy number 2.
All right, I've got a motion. Do I have a second? Got a motion and a second. Now it's open for discussion, if anybody has discussion on it. If there's no discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Leon, you can go, well, you could abstain because you weren't here for the thing, but that's fine. Show it unanimous. All right, we'll move on to 6.4. Consider the adoption of a resolution accepting and approving an amended and restated preliminary service and assessment plan and preliminary assessment roles for the Sonoma Pubic Improvement District, calling a public hearing on the levy of special assessments against property in the district and approving all other matters related thereon.
This does actually call a public hearing. I should point out that Kirk McDaniel with our grant administrators firm, P3, is in the audience and can answer any questions that the council has about any of these items. This basically begins the process, calls a public hearing, which you will hold at a later date as specified here. It will be advertised, and we will proceed with that in according with that schedule. Mr. McDaniel, is there anything else that you would want to add for the council to consider as this resolution is being considered?
If you'll push your little button down there for me. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. I think you covered it all pretty well, Rick. This complies with everything that's been briefed to you before. It's just the first set of documents, all preliminary, and it would be considered at the public hearing in the future. So.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, guys. I will entertain a motion to adopt the adoption of the resolution accepting and approving an amended and restated preliminary service and assessment plan and preliminary assessment roles for the Sonoma Pubic Improvement District, calling a public hearing on the levy of special assessments against property in the district and approving all matters related thereto. That's a mouthful. I'll entertain the motion. There too. It's a mouthful. That's what we were talking about earlier. Well, we got to say a lot on some of these. All right, I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'm sorry, I have been absent.
Mhm.
And I have no idea what
This is going to the next step. This is getting the preliminaries for a new phase. Pretty much sums it up.
Yes, sir, it does. It's a similar action to those that were taken for previous phases of Sonoma Verde,
Like,
which
when yours
allowed
was
for
built
its
and mine was built,
development,
for the
and
next one, we're up to the next phase.
and it is the last such one. Yes, it is.
All right, if there's no other discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Show that unanimous. Moving on to the next one, 6.5. Guys, this is considering the nomination and selection of a new representative for the Rockwall County Emergency Services Corporation, or the ESC. What I would ask council to do is I recommend that we postpone this until the next council meeting, where both Council Member McNeil, which is a new incoming council member, and Mayor Pro Tem Kippett are both in attendance. Is everybody in agreement with that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Everybody's in agreement with that, Shelley, so we'll scratch that one for tonight until such time as we have a meeting where both of them are in attendance. The next thing would be consideration and action regarding allowing and regulating food trucks. Before we start on this, let me turn it over to Rick. There's going to be some questions that he's going to want to ask those of us on council. What I would like to do is get him the answers to those questions, but I'd also like to maybe hold this until the next council meeting where everybody's present, based on the information he wants, as well as we've got two different ordinances that were written, some are strong in one area, some are strong in the other, and give them direction to mold the two together and make them one good, strong document. So, Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and I guess City Attorney Howell and I were both working on this independently of each other, and so you have drafts of his first version and my first version of that will ultimately need to be reconciled. I think there is a series of questions that, if the council is ready to nod your heads yes or no on these questions, it will help us as we consolidate that document and bring back a program that works for you. I also will tell you that one of the things that I said that needs to be done prior to you adopting this ordinance is to meet with those who have expressed an interest in operation of food trucks in our city to make sure that that's workable. I also need to work some more with our sanitarian, although I've gotten some input from her and from others as we've done this, and our final draft needs to have her stamp on it when it comes back to the council as well. So if I could just kind of go down the list, some of these may be obvious answers, some of them may not. And if you just want to say, we're not ready to answer that yet, then that's fine, and we'll do it the next time that we look at it.
Throw the first question out there.
The first question is, there is, I assume, a continuing interest in allowing food trucks under certain conditions in the city.
I'm going to go from end to end on this. Trudy? Or the question was, is there still an interest in food trucks within our community? Okay. Dion? I know you're a brand new council member, but I know you like to eat, you like to try food in various locations. Okay. Norman?
Yes.
I agree. And Dan agrees, and I will tell you that I've had discussions with Mayor Pro Tem Kippett on this as well. Although she's not in attendance, she is in favor of them if they're properly regulated.
The overall approach to this draft, as we've talked about, is one that does not amend the zoning ordinance, but approaches it from the amendment of a regulatory ordinance in our code. That creates a new section in our code that deals with food trucks. That means that this program is not geared toward zoning, but geared toward the things that are in that ordinance. In this ordinance, I think Michael's draft and my draft differ a little bit, but the bottom line is that the food trucks need to be located in an appropriate place where they're not detrimental to a residential neighboring residential property. And Michael approached that with it being zoned for a restaurant and not within 250 feet of a residence or whatever. Mine is simply that it's 1,000 feet from a residence, whether occupied or unoccupied. So we can reconcile that, but if you're okay, maybe just a head nod's okay on this one. If you're okay with that approach, we'll develop that further and go with that. Michael,
You good with that?
has a comment.
It's narrowing that down and coming and meeting in the middle. You're good. You're good. Go ahead. Deal. They're narrowing down and meeting in the middle about where we would regulate them. Norman?
Yes.
Dan? I'm in favor of,
I just wanted to stress to council too, that the ordinance that I submitted is
Mhm.
just one that I've used in the past.
sure.
And it does not mean that council has to do it. The interesting thing about ordinances regarding mobile food trucks is usually roughly half to two-thirds of it are all the same, roughly where you go. But that other third, 25%, it can be completely different. It is, if there are 50 cities, that other third of the ordinance is gonna be 50 different ways.
Right.
So honestly, there's no wrong here in any of the ordinances that I've seen. The only wrong you get in if you start going, hey, we're gonna treat these people differently, and these people will require this, or not require that of others. That's really the only difference. But I don't want anybody to think here that there's a way that we have to do this, or a
Right.
way that we can't do this. Again, the ordinance I submitted, it's worked in other places, doesn't mean it's gonna work here. You know, and I honestly love what Rick is doing, because that's what y'all need to decide is that 1/3 is gonna be completely different in different cities. That's up for y'all to decide.
No, I agree. And for those of you that are here, the reason we're on this agenda item is food trucks are becoming very popular throughout Rockwall County. There are some food trucks that we're opening up at the north end of our town. And for some of these folks that own these food trucks, it's their step out into the restaurant business. There are some that start out with a food truck with the hopes and the desires to eventually move into a brick and mortar building. And their stepping stone is starting in a food truck to earn the money to be able to get into a brick and mortar business. With that being said, in the popularity of food trucks, if you've seen anything in the news lately, Rockwall's got one that's going in north of town that was just recently approved. Cattle Mills has got one that's coming in that was recently announced. Fate's got one that I've been to several times, and it's very nicely done. As long as they're done properly, I don't see why we can't be on the bandwagon with everybody else, because we have folks that live in our community that partake of these various food trucks in other locations. So why not get some of that tax revenue in our own city?
Can I speak to that too?
Absolutely.
I'm a little biased. I invested in a food trailer about 2 years ago. I was a little discouraged. That is a point. Some people do have the ambition to go into the restaurant. I knew for sure I didn't want to go to the restaurant because the culture here was not what it looked like it's about to build to be. I sold it. I knew every step was, you got to do this now. You have to do that now. And it was like, wait a minute. I know I don't want to get there, and this path is leading me there. So I'm biased, but that's why I'm for it. And I think getting ahead of it and design is a positive thing, especially as we look to draw businesses. That's
Absolutely. You know, and Norman had a heck of a service too when he did his. But we're now getting to the point where we're getting to a point that we're doing things a little bit easier. You know, I don't want us as a city to get to where we're pushing people away that want to open businesses here. You know, my goal is to leave this city better than I found it. And right now, one of the things we need to do is bring in more business so that the burden isn't on our citizens for the amount of taxes that come into the city. Right now, it's very lopsided. We have very few businesses and a lot of homes. You know, we need to bring in more business so that offsets some of that burden from our homeowners in our community. And I think this is a start.
May I say something?
Yes, ma'am, you sure
I
may.
also believe, though, that we've got a little while yet to go till 205 is in. And
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's a good thing to have
Mhm.
food trucks come in, just because it gives us an idea of what things will work, what things are wanted out here. It'll also give businesses an idea that do want to do a brick and mortar.
How much interest there is in this community.
Absolutely. So I think this food truck area, or any areas that we put in as food trucks, will give an idea of what our city, city needs and what our citizens want.
I agree.
So, and that's without, making a a solid stake on land and be able to put it wherever and what will work best at what part of the city.
Mhm.
So I think it's a great idea, to be honest with you. We just do, like you just stated, that we just need to make sure it's done properly and for everybody.
Absolutely.
So I'm in complete agreement on this.
Good. Next question, Rick.
Next question, you may not be able or ready to answer the question, but the question is, would you, when a food truck is in operation in McLendon-Chisholm, would you want there to be provision for on-site food consumption or not? This bears on several things. One, the restroom facilities, the amount of parking that might be required, the way the program is laid out. So do you have any thoughts about that as of yet, whether or not on-site food consumption should be allowed or should it be take and go?
Let me give you my take on it and see if, and then I'll go start with Trudy, because this may answer some of us, may not answer all of us. I want to say yes, if the proper amount of parking and restroom facilities are available. You know, am I an expert on what the need is as far as the amount of parking spaces and restroom facilities based on, is it one food truck, is it 5 food trucks? No. But I think with the proper coverage, yes, I think people would like the ability to sit at some sort of a picnic style table and consume it on site. There are a lot that want to get it and go, but there are some that may want to sit there. I know the one in Fate does have a place to sit. Some of these others that are being designed to go both ways. Have on-site consumption and to get it and go. So I think with the proper, I don't want to say zoning, I don't know if that's the right word, but with the proper location for tables and restroom facilities, I think that would be a great idea to have that option.
Michael's draft required the presenting a site plan for each of those, so that would be helpful in
Do you agree,
determining how.
Judy?
I agree that the one thing that I think that we need to take into account is that when a restaurant or business comes in, they are allotted so many parking spots. I also believe that needs to be done for the food trucks. And the reason I say that is because you can't cram as many cars as possible on there.
Right.
And, you know, I think we do need to have per food truck, how many, places to park. And then it also just depends on the area. I mean, if you've got an area that can hold so many cars or whatever, and playground or whatever else you plan on putting out there, such as Smoke Monkey, it's got a large area. Their parking is not the most ideal, but yet they make it work, and they're trying to make things better. But I think we have to have that in place before we actually do start this.
Okay.
That's just my
No,
opinion.
I agree with you. Dean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that we should have a place to sit and eat. I think it's gonna be expected up front, from people that go. They're gonna expect to have a place, so I think it's smart to get ahead of it now instead of later on that and trying to add that. And I think it's good for the atmosphere, it'll be good for business. Place to go together.
Very good. Now, to the man that's had the food truck.
I would say, again, I'm biased,
That's
so I
fine.
would say yes, for a few reasons. One, it helps to build a culture. The thing about a food truck park is you want barbecue, your wife want cupcakes, your son want hot dogs, your daughter want nachos, and it's all about the option and the variety that really make a food truck park successful. I do agree you need all those things in place, from parking to restrooms to trash cans and all of those things to be considered, but I don't think that it's optional to not have it. To me, that would dampen the success of it in terms of how a food truck park is operated.
Dan?
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of Norman, in that you really don't want to restrict the options for business to come in. If they see that they can only sell from the truck and not have the availability of seating for folks and maybe a play space for the kids, that it'll lessen their desire to come here. So I'd like to have the option of that availability. And then,
And I think Lorna would agree.
And when we get to determining what those numbers are, usually in zoning of a restaurant, the zoning ordinance requires a certain number of parking spaces per seat in the restaurant. So maybe we can interpolate that to bring back some recommendations on what the number of parking versus the number of seating area available should be to make that work.
Absolutely.
and then one other thing is that Mr. Hall has had experience with other cities, I'm sure.
Yes.
So you can guide us on this, and, again, we're not the experts on this, and you've had experience, so, give us some guidance on this, and we'll be able to explore what's best, for all.
Next question.
In my draft, I said that the council would set the hours of operation by motion further down the road. In Michael's version, he actually sets those hours, I think, at 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. or something like that. Do you think the hours ought to be established by this ordinance or not?
I agree that they need to be established. Do I think 8 a.m.'s a little late to start out?
And he may not have had 8, I don't remember, but
Yeah,
it ought to
but-
be
And
at
using that
least
as a
7 o'clock.
hypothetical.
It ought to be at least 7 o'clock for coffee and breakfast
Well, I think
type
it-
items. And
I think it needs to be earlier than that.
I
You know,
agree, I agree.
I come home at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's a lot of traffic on 205 in our city. And I think that if a coffee truck type setup or a coffee food truck was set up and they took the chance at opening at 6 o'clock, I think there's going to be a lot of roadside traffic for them.
So just to stress what I said before, what I did, and I think what Rick did too, a lot of
Sure.
it is suggestion.
No, I agree.
I do absolutely recommend here's the thing, contracts and ordinances have one very similar characteristic. If they're written crappily, they can't be enforced. Then
Right.
it's completely worthless. The contract's worthless, the ordinance is worthless.
Right.
So from an enforcement standpoint, I would recommend council, even if it's 6 a.m., I really don't care about the time, but have something on the time so the people that are enforcing the ordinance are gonna know, say, okay, well, wait, these people at this time. What was the last motion by the council? When did we have
Correct.
it? It's right there, it's in the ordinance so that we know it and we have it, and it makes it easier for those people to enforce it.
I think hours need to be established. Do I know what the proper open and close is right now? No.
Okay, we'll work on that if that's everybody's thought. We'll work on some thoughts on
Good
that.
with that, Judy? Dion?
Agree.
There is a time in the evening, at least my grandmother used to say, there's a time in the evening that after which nothing really very good
I
happens.
agree with you.
So
I
you probably
agree
have,
with you.
working nights, you probably have some
Yes.
considerable experience with that, man.
Yes. Not a lot of good things happen after dark. There's always a market for pizza at any time of the day.
I don't know that we're gonna have to necessarily worry about people opening up.
You know, you got me in trouble for that one. Pizza is one of my favorite foods. There is never a time you can't eat pizza. All right, next question, Rick.
This one may bear some thought, whether food trucks must be periodically removed from the approved locations. A food truck is, by definition, generally a temporary use.
Correct.
And I've seen some ordinances that require it to be such that it can be either pulled or driven off-site onto a state roadway and actually removed from the site. I've seen some other ordinances that say at the end of every day, you got to take it home with you. We don't want it, and I think Michael's ordinance may have said something like that, at least some limitation to that. And I think part of that is a distinction between a brick and mortar building and a food truck. You're granting some considerations to at least the person keeps the truck or trailer or whatever
Right.
in good enough repair that it can be removed.
Sure.
And if the council decides to not do this program anymore, you're gonna want it to be able for them to take it off. So maybe we ought to just think about that a little bit. I don't have the answer to even what I think about that, but we ought to talk about whether, at some point, whether there's an amount of time they can sit in that location without being moved.
Let me,
Mobile food truck.
right.
You know, mobile is actually driving truck on the truck. And so you don't want it to be able to act like a brick and mortar restaurant, and that's not the intent of what we're regulating.
Let me see if I can kind of answer that one, and if council agrees with me. Obviously, we are not intending it to be a permanent situation. I think we need to do a little more homework in our understanding of the different styles of how long it stays, when it needs to move, and maybe we need to pattern one of our own to fit our situation for our city. Because we do want food trucks. Do I want them to have to move every day or every week? I think that might put a little burden on them. But at the same time, we want to make sure what they don't park there looks like a broken down Sanford and Son truck a week after they're there, and it, yeah, they might be doing some business, but it kind of looks like an eyesore to people that are coming and partaking of it, and it may not look presentable to the community. I don't know the right answer there, but I think it's worthy of some additional research, because the hopes are eventually they'll want to move into a brick and mortar. But what that time frame of how long they can operate there before we maybe ask them to do something a little different, I don't have the right answer for you yet. Do you agree with me, Trudy?
Well,
Yeah.
Don't think just we have these rules, and we're enforcing these rules, and we have these regulations, we have this stuff, okay?
Correct.
We're not, and there's no real grandfathering here, because we need to amend the ordinance because something is not working, or we find, hey, something will work better, we can amend the ordinance. And we can amend the provisions like the public paper provisions, provisions, to enforce it, to do that, if we notice. So I don't want people to feel like this is the only shot. You know, the food company tries to do it.
Correct.
may
Right.
I add, and Norman may be the person
Yeah.
you need to talk to, but aren't there like, services, repairs, grease trap, cleaning out, all that stuff like that per truck? Or,
What type of truck?
okay, so if we could try to figure out, I mean, like, what is the maintenance on these trucks that they have to go somewhere and dump the grease or
Well,
I mean,
some of that's gonna be under, I think, under the health requirements that they
yeah.
have to do
But-
certain, some.
But what I'm
piece of
saying
that.
though is,
Yeah.
is there a time limit? Is there a 2 week, every 2 weeks you're supposed to do this? Okay, then maybe make it every 2 weeks. If it's supposed to be 3 months, make it up to
That
3
they have to
months.
go do that.
That they would
make
have to
sure
do
that
that. They-
service is done and
That they
documented.
need to make sure that that has been done and, I mean, I'm just saying.
Because that is
there's-
moving, possibly moving the vehicle at
Yeah.
that point, or
And then
that
that-
food trailer.
And so I'm just, that's what I'm thinking is
It's an
whatever.
option I wasn't thinking about.
Whatever their requirements are to
Mhm.
have this food truck, they need to be going by those, which means if they have to go somewhere to
Mhm.
dump the toilet, or, I mean, I don't.
Yeah,
know,
no, I
somewhere,
get what you're
But I'm
saying.
just saying, they need to do that, they need to go somewhere, that's their time, and then they can come back, and they have their paper stating they did this, and now they're back in. Yeah.
Food management certificates, we got other health regulations and requirements, obviously, it's not for the county, but
No. We do. We will, our sanitarian will do that.
Oh, okay, great. So see, there are other regulations besides that don't really apply when we come under this ordinance. So like, because this, not just this, there's also that, which is like health, food management goes into the type of violence and health posted, maybe with citations for not having posted, things like that. So rest assured there are other regulatory agencies and requirements and rules and regulations with which they must comply in addition to this.
Is already set standard. Like, for
Right.
instance, if
Yeah.
it's in city limit versus if it's not city limit, it's in the county. there are different
Different
Rules.
requirements.
levels of restrictions that is available. But I'll say this, I think at some point you have to consider what the question is being asked. A barbecue trailer, so you have a truck, then you have a trailer. You have to really communicate as to what you want. To your point, a barbecue trailer, at least mine didn't, because I didn't fry anything. I just barbecue and the wife did cupcakes. We didn't have grease traps, but I had to have wood, I had ashes, I had all type of dirt and grime. But the question is with certain types of food trucks or trailers, what comes with having a barbecue trailer on site in terms of the trash, in terms of the soot, in terms of, those are things you really got to sit down and you have to define what you want. Can you stack and leave wood on site? I can tell you, if you want this to be a success and something that kind of, you know, a go-to place for the city of McLendon-Chisholm, having the ability, let's talk about smoke sessions.
Yes.
Started as a trailer, okay? The statistics show that when a food truck is stationary in one place, it's more successful. And so if it all depends on what you're trying to create. Are you just trying to create something where food trucks can come to, or are you trying to create an attraction for the city to say, this is our food truck park, we're gonna take ownership of, you know, everything, the ins, the outs, the decor, the aesthetics and everything. And if that's the case, to consider, if that's what you're gonna do, if that's what you're gonna invest in, to some degree, there needs to be the ability to leave things on site to make it theirs and their own, and so that they can have a success and people enjoying their traffic. All of that, I think, has to be considered.
And he brought up a very good point with that one.
He did,
Smoke
yes.
session started at 548 and
No,
276.
that's not where they started.
No, that's where they originally were, and then they moved to.
They was on 66 at the food store, and they moved.
Oh, and that's right. That's right,
Yeah.
because that's the first time I ate.
Right.
And then they moved all the way down to 548 and 276, and then they moved right over by the
property
PD on
that they
66
built.
again. And now they have a very, very beautiful building. And to go in there, it's a really neat place, and you get in and out of there quick, even though it looks easy.
I have a question.
Yes.
What happens when you have let's say two coffee places two coffee trucks that want to be in at the same time? So I mean.
Here's the way I think that
Yeah.
has to be controlled. I don't think the city can do that. I think that has to be controlled by the owner of the property. The owner of the property determines each person that submits a request to have a food truck must submit a written documentation from the owner of the property that they have approved this particular food truck to be on their property. One of the things I did in my ordinance, though, was to limit on one property for the purpose of this ordinance, no more than 3 food trucks could be on one property. And then I said beyond that, they would need to go to a PD zoning, requirement, because that creates a food court creates a more permanent situation, I think, that we might want to take a look at from a not a regulatory standpoint, but from a regulatory ordinance standpoint. My ordinance says no more than 3 on one property, and the property owner has to grant written permission for that truck to operate on his or her property.
Okay. Leon, you got any input?
So would the owner, would they set like a time frame for like each particular food truck? So, you know, like variety wise, so if you have 3 food trucks and you have 3 different styles of food trucks, do you as a city want the same food trucks there for a year, 2 years, or we want to see a variety and see like?
Well, and I think you could adopt a regulation that says the maximum time a food truck can be in business is, and I think Michael's ordinance does say 6 months. But then a successful business would have to move out of there if they're successful in 6 months and find another place. So you can do that. You can limit that amount of time, and the owner of the property can really do anything they want to do with it. They can say, be there a month and then you're gone. You know, that would be out of our control. But we could set a maximum amount of time if you want to.
I think in answer to your question is maybe we need to look at what some of the other cities that have the food truck parks are doing in that case. because if you have a very successful business that is doing good as a food truck, I don't know that want to curtail them, because we tell them, up, you've got to move now in 6 months, and they can't move somewhere else in the city, we make lose them.
If the consumers don't like it, they're not making money. But
Exactly.
if they're making money, everybody's excited.
Yep.
Why run them off?
You agree,
That's
Dan?
how I
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah.
All right, next question, Rick.
I think the next question we probably answered by implication, and that is that we would have off-site, I don't know what's the matter with me. We would have off-site parking requirements,
Yes.
off-street parking requirements, whether it just a certain number for the people that are working there, plus the people we've answered on that deal, but their parking would have to be handled off-street, and I think we've answered.
Well, and I think
We've
that's
answered
detrimental, not only to keep congestion on our streets, but the success of the businesses as well.
I think that's right.
So, what else?
Whether construction materials for service drives and parking should be regulated by the city. Would you be okay with gravel? Would you be okay with dirt? Would you be okay with asphalt? Do you want concrete? Is there some construction level for those driveways and parking areas that you think we ought to stipulate?
I think, whether it's, for lack of a better explanation, pea gravel, service or, surface or better. What's like pea gravel at the one in site, that's around where the parking is?
The parking itself?
Yeah. Well, both. Is there? Okay. No, I know, but I think it needs to be maybe just a little bit better than dirt, depending on where the location is, because you have some areas here that when it rains, it may be fine. Other areas, it rains and you barely step on it, and you sink 3 inches. I think it's going to depend on where the service of where this is going to be located, that we may need to do something like a gravel surface to keep from having cars and people sink when they go to grab something to eat. You agree? Because if you start talking about asphalt, think about the
Well,
expense.
no, I'm not even talking about that.
Yeah.
But I will say, until 205 comes in, because once you get 205 in there, and those cars there's 6 lanes, or however many lanes they decide to put in, and you've got gravel that has come out of that area, we're talking chipped everything, so for now, yes, it needs to be that, but then once by that time, we'll figure out, or they'll figure out how successful this will be, and if they do see it's gonna be successful, they might want to go ahead and blacktop it. Or
Correct.
something to that effect.
Correct.
But until then, because it's gonna be a hot mess out there on 205 until then, but,
I think once 205 is concrete, one of the things we've said in here is if it is a county road or a state roadway, that you'd need to get a permit from the county or the state for that drive entrance. Once 205 is concrete and there are curbs there, the state's gonna require a certain radius.
Correct.
They're gonna require concrete extension up to the end of the right-of-way.
Absolutely.
And beyond that, it's gonna be taken care of. The county may be more lenient because their roads aren't generally concrete. So the surface of the road, like you say, may have some impact on that.
Okay.
yeah.
Deanna, any question
I
or
agree
statement?
that
Yeah.
gravel are better, but also if we're gonna wanna dictate how many people can park there and how they're gonna park.
Well, that's what we were talking about earlier in the parking
We
regulations.
just leave it up to people to pull in and park wherever they want.
It's hard to mark off a gravel parking lot.
Yeah.
You'd have to go by total square footage.
Right, and just basically having to rely on people to park for the community without them.
Yeah, but we're gonna be that way anyway. Because even if you go to some of the other food truck parks, like in Fate, when you park in there, it's just go in where you want. There's no striped spot.
I actually think it's going to have to be a little bit open-ended on this because it's really a question of safety. And, one field versus another, it may be needed to be gravel, the other one may not gravel. So based on the decision on safety, maybe have the engineer go out and take a look at it and make the determination. Maybe I don't want to get too complex on this thing. My preference would probably be gravel. That's fairly inexpensive, but again, safety's got to dictate on this.
Next question?
Site lighting, do we want to, if we're open until 10 o'clock at night, do we want to have any site lighting or security lighting required? If they're going to be there, if their trailer or food truck is going to be there overnight, or do we let them decide that, or?
I think that's,
Leave it to them.
let me
No,
ask.
I think you gotta look at the comp plan, don't you?
Yeah, let's look at what our, and I agree with him, what our comp plan says about anything like that.
Okay.
On top of, I can't remember if there's lighting at the Fate one, because we've both been there. If there's
I
lighting
don't-
there at night.
Yeah, I haven't been there at night, but I know the goal in our comp plan is to keep
It's downtown, right? The Fate thing is
our stuff.
downtown?
Yeah,
See-
right,
see,
it's
in-
catty corner from City Hall.
Those are likely,
Or at least from the
those
old
are
City Hall.
likely to at least have street lighting because
Yeah.
they have street lights downtown. Ours are not likely to be in a location. If it's 1,000 feet from a resident, it's not going to be where there's a street light to help
Right.
with that. So-
My preference would be lighting for safety reasons. Huh? Yeah.
Okay.
And nowadays, the Septed way of doing lighting is usually
And then signage limitations, I have never read the city of McLendon sign ordinance, I assume we have one. But I will tell you that, like the coffee signs that are on the state right of way, it's only a matter of time before the state sees those and comes and pulls them.
correct.
And I think we probably have a similar limitation on our roadways that you can't put an advertising sign in the public right of way. For one thing, you have some liability if somebody hits it and it causes a problem. For another thing, just something people don't usually do. So maybe the answer to that question ought to be, we ought to look at what the sign ordinance says and then make some determination back of what
I
we want
will
to do
say
with
100%
that.
agree with that one.
Okay, that we may want to, at some point in the future, take the executive session. You've got the town of Gilbert from 2016, U.S. Supreme Court case. You also have Austin Reagan, it's 2019 case. And that's a case that's now currently pending and before the Supreme Court, and just went there about 6-8 months ago. And it's gonna make it, in my opinion, very difficult for cities to regulate signs of any, I'm not gonna say of any size, because you can still regulate, even the town of Gilbert City still regulate size, but any content whatsoever. And it's amazing because every once in a while the law doesn't make sense. This time it does. The whole principle of the Austin case is that Reagan National had advertising signs and they regulated for off-premise businesses. Very briefly, if I have a sign on my yard and it says, hey, I make the best barbecue ever, eat here, that's on-premise sign. Right? It's advertising business on-premise. If it says, hey, Rick has the best steak in town and he's 3 blocks down the street and that's the sign on the yard, that's off-premise. The point of the, and it's very persuasive. One of my all-time favorite Supreme Court justices is Scalia. Scathing wit, unbelievable intellect, but he was very poignant also in what he wrote. And he made it very simple. He said the most persuasive argument is when somebody loses at the trial level, then wins at the appellate level. And now it's before the Supreme Court. That's what's happened with this. The city won at the trial level, lost at the appellate level. And basically what the court held at the appellate level is if a city employee has to read the sign, it's content-based. Makes some sense to that. If the words on the sign matter, these are my words, if the words on the sign matter, then it's content-based and the city can't regulate it, it's a violation of the First Amendment.
Right.
Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has still said cities can regulate, do 2 things. They can completely ban signs of any kind in their right-of-way. That's not a problem. And cities can also regulate on the basis of size. But you have to be consistent when you regulate signs. So anything, maybe over that big or whatever a city is going to do, that they have to, they can do that, and that's fine. Anything regarding the words violates your First Amendment. So, and I haven't seen a particular sign ordinance, but since we're talking about it, and that may be an issue here, that may be something we also revisit as we're doing this as well. So, I mean,
Okay.
it's probably good that we're doing it now, because it's still gonna take the Supreme Court a while to get through that, but it'll be interesting to see what they do, because quite honestly, the city of Austin's real only defense is that that's the way we've been doing it for 180 years, and we should kind of keep doing it. I mean, honestly, not necessarily the best argument. The whole zoning argument, you can regulate for aesthetics and for looks and keep property values, et cetera, doesn't trump the police power of the state, doesn't trump the First Amendment right on content. So just
That,
FYI.
that will eliminate a lot of cities' regulation of off-site advertising. Some cities don't allow that, or they allow one site per subdivision for off-site advertising, or one per retail operation. And if that continues the way it is, then if they can put a sign that says enter or exit or entrance, they can put a sign that says anything, anywhere.
The
So-
truth is, up and down 205, it's the builders of these new communities that got way more signs than anybody. When it comes to a food truck or a food trailer, that trailer is the signage. The wrap that is invested on that vehicle is the signage. There's signage that they put 10-foot tall poles on top of the trailer. They decorate their own signage. Their social media is their signage. So I don't think that's necessarily an issue, but you can always insulate
I think that's a
yourself.
good point, Norman, and while I think those coffee or food signs in the right-of-way need to be prohibited, that's a good point, not regulate how big the sign is on their unit. Let them do whatever they want to on their own unit. That may be a good approach to that. Hadn't thought
What's
of
your
that.
next question?
Okay, some of these are gonna come from Michael's, the sale of alcohol, at a food truck. We don't have, and, do we want to allow it? Can we allow it? I mean, we don't have,
The state of Texas allows. There is a mobile alcohol food truck around Dallas itself
and there's a permit that's required by the TABC for that.
to operate and sell alcohol food truck, yes.
And then there's also the question of, I don't know whether the city of McLendon-Chisholm has an open container ordinance. Yeah, we'll need to look at that, because I hadn't really thought about the alcohol issue until I read Michael, so
If
there's
it's
some work to do on that.
properly regulated, obviously with the TABC requirements and all that, we just need to go back and look at our ordinances, because, we wanna make sure it doesn't become a situation where we have a couple of nice food trucks that people wanna come and sit down and maybe eat at the picnic table because they like that particular food truck, and you've got a alcohol serving venue next to it, and you get some that like to just sit there and have a few too many drinks. I don't want to be in that environment.
Because we can change it, because we can modify it, especially now with our food. We're probably going to figure out what
Yeah.
if you like, if you don't like, it's going to change. I would suggest starting off with it, to see if that's how things go, and if that's something that's a lot easier along down the line, and go, okay, I think it could work, and we bring it in versus we start off with it, and like, okay, this is a disaster, and trying to get it covered.
Right.
It's not, yeah, so in second two, this can cause maybe some people who have to what is sold, as of September of last year, there's no more beer and wine. There's no more beverages. Now the ones, all of it. So once, like if you go from July, as soon as your permit expires in July, the next permit you're gonna, it doesn't mean you have to sell all three of those, but it means it's now just one permit, you can't sell all three. So that's actually really important, factor with, media relevance.
I think it's quite possible there'll be some things that people may want to do with their food truck that, based on the approvals that have been granted by elections in McLendon-Chisholm, that it would require an election to allow them to do some of the things that they want to do. So there is a significant amount of research that needs to be done
Yes.
with that as we put this program
And I
together that
think
hasn't been
for
done
the
yet.
alcohol side of it, we need to do a little bit more homework, and I agree. Let's start out and make sure that the food truck thing is successful before we add that next piece into it. Trudy?
Can we, just see what Fate has done, or are they,
We can ask.
I mean, just
where the
kind of,
various-
just see where they,
Yeah.
and what roads they found and what, just figure out what they've done.
And I think on
learn
several,
from them.
several pieces of this tonight, asking the other places that have established food truck areas, what's worked, what hasn't, and
What-
that helps to not recreate the wheel.
Well, I just thinking of restaurants, there are often limitations on restaurants for 50% food and 50% alcohol based on the enabling election that has allowed that to happen. That is theoretically a safeguard against a restaurant turning into a bar.
Correct.
With outside food and alcohol, we want to have some of those same protections, I would think, if necessary, to keep that from turning into an outside bar.
Correct.
So I don't know that 50-50 is necessarily applicable to that,
Right.
but we got to be kind of cautious and deliberative about those issues, I think.
We're allowed to be more restrictive, not less restrictive. So we want to do 75, 25, and do something like that. Maybe we start off with something small, maybe we've got a selection of either the first quadrant or the also on the budget or something like that. That is FYI.
Gotcha. What's the next question, Rick?
Well, I don't really have any other questions other than just a couple of comments. I think, location, obviously both of our ordinances required the food service to meet the health service requirements of the state. The location we'll have to deal with. Both of our ordinances required them to be registered with the comptroller and to provide proof of that number, which means they're going to have to show that they're collecting sales tax or at least paying it. So that I think this gives us a lot of information that we can move forward to the next step and try to come back with a draft a bit later that works.
All right, and what's gonna happen, we've all been unanimous on, yes, we want food trucks, it's gonna be their homework assignment to bring back an ordinance that's gonna answer a lot of the questions that he's asked of us tonight. And see if we can't come up with a good version that fits, so we can move forward. All right, moving on to 6.7.
One more, I'm sorry, one thing.
Go ahead.
When you talked about on-site trucks or trailers that are on-site, I think there should be a process of application where it is determined that it is aesthetically pleasing. I think that language needs to be clear and defined that, you can't just hook up to anything, roll up, and start serving people, because it's right
Yes.
on the main corridor of McLendon-Chisholm, and it represents our city.
I'll tell you, with that, we're going to have to establish some criteria about what's aesthetically pleasing, and we're going to have to probably require drawings be submitted so that we can tell what it's going to look like.
Well, and I think I know.
And it's going to have to come to the council. I didn't ask that question yet. Do you want every food truck permit to come to the council for approval?
Well, here's what I'll ask you, Rick, and I think this will answer, because I kind of know where he's going with this, but maybe think along. Is maybe check with the other established areas of what they're doing as far as what's being allowed to come in. Because a food truck, by definition, is a vehicle that has that restaurant-type facility within it. A food trailer, same thing. Is by definition, that vehicle's supposed to be capable of being mobile under its own power. I know the trailer obviously has to be towed, because there has been a situation where there is a food truck that is being used, but it is parked on a trailer and hauled everywhere because it does not run to the best of my knowledge.
You know what,
I don't know that that's aesthetically.
either the trailer or the truck or both, one of the things you could tie that to is a registration, and the ability of that truck to operate on a roadway in the state. And that actually would help a lot of things. It would help us in the idea of how often do they have to be moved off or whatever.
Right.
It establishes that they can be moved off if they need to be.
Because I'm not trying to discount anybody's service, but if you gotta haul it in here and it doesn't run,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
it becomes just a de facto structure in the city. Okay.
And just to consider the community that is right across the street from it, I think there needs to be some level of consistency in terms of what we're presenting as a city.
So to begin with, do y'all want all the permits to come to the council for consideration?
This is my last day. So,
I don't know that I want them all coming, but I think there needs to be an establishment of what we're looking for.
Okay, we'll try to do that. One of the things I do want to put in here, though, is that if we reject a permit, then we rejected that permit, but they have the absolute right to appeal to the council.
Absolutely.
And that way, that I think that just kind of works better until we're
Correct.
more satisfied with our rules. And it may be some of these we see that we've got a rule against that even the staff thinks, well, we really shouldn't have done that, but in order for you to get a permit, until that ordinance is amended, you're going to have to go to the council, we're going to have to work through it. So,
And I think with some of the questions you asked earlier, it'll address some of that, you know, yes, they'll always have the option to come to us at the end, but with some of the criteria and the questions you've asked, I think that will give you the ability to say, yes, you can operate that within our city, or no, we're not gonna issue you a permit, whatever the case is.
and I know that you have a case that's coming before planning and zoning for the development, a non-residential development, commercial development at 550 and 205. And I know that one of the things that developer wants to do is to ultimately have among, several restaurants there, but he's proposing a food truck area within his development. He's included that as a zoning request in his planned development. This ordinance would say that that's fine, that if that provision comes, this is going to come through before this ordinance is passed, but basically it said that the provisions under which that zoning, PD zoning allows it would govern over these particular requirements, except for health department and so forth. So when we look at a PD that has a food truck court on it, then we need to make sure that everything in there is what we want to see in there. That one will be grandfathered if it's approved under PD zoning. So we need to be very meticulous about the way that we look at that.
Just let me get this straight. So they're thinking of putting in brick and mortar and then also having an area for food trucks?
They've got several buildings shown on their site plan. Some of those are restaurants. There's a restaurant shown on one particular area that initially they want to put in sort of as an incubator for a food truck. I think it's only one, but they're showing that as sort of a transitional use within the PD. So we need to be careful. I'm not saying that you don't need to do that, but the regulations for that PD need to be comprehensive as related to food trucks.
I personally don't like that idea. That's just me. I think if you're going to do brick and mortar and whatever else on your area, that's what you need to stay with and not be putting in food trucks and whatever else just because of, I think that's where you're going to begin to get the trashy look. And then that's just my personal opinion. I can already see it.
I'm gonna tell you that you need to wait and see what comes from P and Z before you make that determination.
Okay, but I'm just saying, from my vision right now, as what I'm thinking,
Because the individual that is planning on that development, the whole reason for having a portion of it for food trucks is the transition of those type of people that are using a food truck to springboard into a brick and mortar.
well, I'm not, I don't know who you're talking about, but all I'm just saying is, I don't like the idea, what's in my head as being a hodgepodge of whatever. So that's all, I'm gonna wait for the information, but that's just me personally.
Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, thank you. Okay, appreciate it. Okay, please, two things don't do. If you don't, I will promise to start making sure that the mayor always dresses sharper. Okay, do not, and I'm not talking about any particular zoning case, because it's not on the agenda, and I would never do that. As a general rule, you either have your mobile food trucks under zoning, or you don't. You don't have this ordinance and then have a PD, which is zoning, to allow that. It's one or the other. It gets convoluted, well, wait, those rules don't apply to us because we're this, it's too difficult. Second, permits, you are the council. We have the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. Checks and balances, we learned in third grade. It's y'all's job to make laws and set policy. Deciding, as Rick pointed out, it's a regulatory ordinance. That's a day-to-day executive function. That's an administrative duty, et cetera, not a legislative one. And then third, that is where the appeal, if you all are the ones that do set the permit, where's the appeal? We got a due process issue because we're not letting them have something, and we're gonna give them a right to appeal, but to who? To the council? That doesn't make sense. So the agency that denied it, the body that denied it, that's who they're gonna appeal to. So it's much better letting Rick, city administrator, whoever in staff make the permits. And I totally agree with what the mayor says. The permits are based on what the council wants to have. Give us this, and this. If you do it, you can have the permit. But then the actual permits, the decision on whether to grant them or deny them is with staff.
All right. You know what homework you need to do.
Yeah, we'll work on all of that. It's probably gonna be difficult for us to describe the situation of what's aesthetically pleasing. It would almost have to be that's gonna be difficult to do, so we'll do what we can with that.
And that's why I probably asked what everyone else has done, just to kind of give us an idea, and we might have to readdress that particular point.
But that's okay, and it's good to look at what other people have done, because it's good to have definitions in ordinances, especially regulatory ones, where you get this, you get that, you qualify for these, well, what are the standards? Well, here they are. That's gonna help you avoid a challenge if the ordinance is vague, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you also have to define every single term in the entire ordinance. For example, judges are tasked, regardless of whether they do it or not, they're supposed to do everything they can to keep a statute and ordinance alive. Section 311 of the government code is a textbook for judges on how to interpret ordinances, rules, and regulations. One of those is give their words their plain and ordinary meaning unless they're defined specifically elsewhere in the ordinance, rule, regulation, or statute. So even using the term aesthetically pleasing, we would just go to Webster's basically and see what that means. There's a balance to it. You don't want to be too specific because you rule out something, but you don't want it to be too vague because you have a vagueness to it.
All right. Well, we know where we gotta go with it, so we'll move on to 6.7. Discussion and consider a reimbursement agreement by and between the city of McLendon-Chisholm and Land Solutions SV LLC for work to Edwards Road and League Road, and authorization for the mayor to execute said agreement. Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. You have in your packet a proposed reimbursement agreement that the city attorney has reviewed and signed off on if it is your desire to proceed with the project. This project has been discussed for several years. It's been discussed from the standpoint of the city paying a portion and the county paying a portion and the developer paying a portion. And at this point, the county is committed to doing, the project scope is really from League Road, where the developer installed concrete ends, to Edwards Road, and then toward 550 to where county maintenance begins. That basically is the scope of this road. And if I knew geography here a little better, I could probably describe that a little better. But it's a substantial chip seal project, and the developers have agreed to. The county's not going to participate in this as such, but keep in mind they're going to do from League Road to 548, and from the end of this project to 550. So it's all going to be a new chip seal road. This portion is about a $300,000 project. The developer has agreed to do $200,000. The city's portion is not to exceed $100,000 for the project. And like I say, it's been discussed for several years. Stephen Davis with the developer is here to answer any questions or that the council may have. And I'm sorry, I don't know the gentleman who's with you, but both of you welcome to our meeting tonight. So be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the project and proceeding with it.
Is there any questions? This is developers paying basically 2/3 and we're paying 1/3.
It is a budgeted item in this year's operating budget.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
I can. On Sonoma Verde Facebook page, Tuesday? No, was it Monday or either last Thursday or Friday? There was someone who took a picture, morning rush hour traffic. They was, I think, number 20. That car.
Oh, I saw that. That's coming out. What
That's
we're
on
talking about
205.
is fixing the road behind the subdivision.
To that point, just to be aware, that's what the type of burden on coming out of the front entrance of Sonoma Verde is on rush hour. That back road is undrivable.
That's what we're talking about fixing,
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just
Okay,
painting
got
the
you,
picture.
got you.
I'm,
Now I'm
I'm
trying
just speaking
I'm-
to
I'm
that as a
tracking now.
resident of Sonoma Verde. That, I mean, I don't want to drive my vehicle on that back road as an option, but then again, I don't want to be in line 20.
You know,
Yeah, my pickup is my baby.
it will
I know.
offer a better option to get to 548 or to 550.
Yes.
And that's important now, but it's really going to be important at a time when 205 is under construction.
So yes.
Stephen,
Does
did you have
anybody
anything you want to
questions
answer?
for the two gentlemen here? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agreement. All right, I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. Any questions?
Yeah, I had a question. I recall this pretty vividly. I think it was back in October, it was postponed because it was getting close to the rainy season, and so you didn't want to proceed with it at that time. And I think we were pretty close to agreeing on, and it's been budgeted $100,000, if I recall. What's going to be the length of the time duration for the improvement on the road?
You'll push that button so it'll turn on.
The time to complete the road?
Yes.
It is about a 2-week process.
Oh.
And we will
okay.
keep one lane open at all times to ensure for any fire safety or residents need to get in or out of the community, they'll have access at all times.
That's great.
So we'll have adequate traffic control.
And it's dry enough.
Quick.
It's dry enough at this point to go ahead and proceed, I assume.
Yes, sir, sure is.
Very good.
Yes?
Sure.
Who does the inspection of the road to make sure that it's going to be a proper,
No, it's a good question.
Yeah.
We have hired Alpha Testing. They do geotechnical testing on, all of our projects and most construction projects around town. So we'll have professional engineers or technicians at least on site at all times inspecting the process.
and do
And then
they,
Dub will be involved as well, city engineer.
okay. Do they turn in paperwork stating that they have done this inspection and that it is of proper depth and, you know, we just had some issues in Sonoma Verde, and I just want to make sure that everything is done properly.
Absolutely, yes, they will.
And I think that's a good point that Stephen and his group have agreed to manage the project as well, so it's also a significant contribution to the job.
And we appreciate that.
Yes, and
We
we
really
will-
do.
Fantastic.
We're just a little gun shy, so.
No, understood completely. We have 2 project managers that work for us, and someone will be out there virtually the entire time while they're doing it. And we have and will continue to coordinate with the county as well, because I know they're doing some construction on Edwards Road as well, to make sure that all the trucks play nice together.
Yeah,
So we'll be
yeah.
out there to manage it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I wanted to say one other thing is that when this was initially proposed, I recall that the county was going to be a one-third partner in this, and then they fell out. And so I just wanted to say that, from my standpoint, I appreciate that you guys came back in and were willing to fill that hole, so to speak. So we do
Absolutely.
appreciate, because it was $100,000 that you really didn't have to dedicate yourselves to, but you did that. So we appreciate it, at least I
Well,
do.
thank you for that. I appreciate that. You know, we enjoy being here. In fact, we love being here. We want to be a good partner with the city in all that we do. We know that this is good for the city. We know this is good for Sonoma Verde. We had lots of conversations with the county and tried to change their mind and urge them to help out somewhat. I know they're doing other projects around the city and near the city that are helping. So we just want to do our part and make sure that we have good roads all the way around.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. If there's no other questions, I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
your
very much.
contribution.
Appreciate
Appreciate it.
All right, I've got a motion, I've got a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor? Aye.
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 Show that unanimous?
I think we'll ask the mayor to sign this contract this evening, because Stephen had told me that they might try to start this project this week.
Yes, we're scheduled to start on Monday, so a
I
signature
guess
would
I
be
gotta sign it
fantastic.
tonight.
So
All right.
You don't
So
get the
expect-
Yeah, I'll sign it.
expect that to be soon, and I think Stephen had indicated they would let the HOA know so that people can be notified if any of you have abilities to do that as well. Letting people know usually helps, not only helps them, but helps get the project done.
Tell our daughter so she's not complaining to the city administrator that when she goes out the back way, it may be a little delayed. All right, now that we're, of course I hit that and the computer goes down. All right, now that we're done with that, we are gonna move to 7.1, which is adjourn to executive session in accordance with Texas Government Code 551.074, A1, personnel matters to deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, or dismissal of a public officer or employee, dealing with interim city manager and interim city administrator and new city administrator. The time is 8 o'clock. We are now in executive session. I'll see you guys in the other room. I'll sign that real quick before we go in. Huh? Yeah, just keep going, keep going, keep going. He's on a roll tonight. He's doing everything he can to get me in trouble. I believe so. I would love, yeah, you and I both. You know, Mama on vacation is? Getting at least 3 hours of sleep at night for a month. That's a vacation. All right, we ready? The time is 8:12. We're back from the executive session. I will, after the executive session meeting, I'll look for a motion from council to authorize me to extend the contractor or negotiate with our interim city manager and with his contract to keep him on until such time that we do the final selection for a new city administrator.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that you sit down with Rick and renegotiate his contract for extension.
Got a motion, do I have a second? Do I have any discussion? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. We'll enter into, I will speak with Rick tomorrow. We'll keep him on for a few more days, at least until we can get somebody hired. All right. Now, moving on. Updates, discussion, and direction of staff. The only thing I have is there was a lot of chatter from Thursday with CWD trash pickup, especially in Sonoma Verde. There were citizens that witnessed trash truck personnel intentionally picking up the trash cans after they went through them, trash falling out of trash cans and then not picking it up.
Was that when we had the storms?
We were having storms, but I have witnesses that actually witnessed them as soon as the trash had been dumped into the trash can and the trash can was put down. They were intentionally kicking them over as they were leaving individual residents. And one of them is one that you all know that comes to these kind of committees. It's a very upstanding person that you actually just witnessed it himself. That they were intentionally kicking people's trash cans over. We are going to have Rick have them either come in and visit with council or he will discuss that with them. I know in front of my residents that things were knocked out of the trash can when they were emptying them and they didn't even go back and pick it up. They just left it distributed. And unfortunately, in the neighborhoods that have HOAs, I have had trash that's going in my yard and I get a notice from the HOA that I've got trash in my yard. And they look into my trash and the stuff that's blue in there just happen to be, they happen to drive around the same time that the trash was falling out. So there's got to be something done on a little bit better performance by our waste company. Let's see, what else? You got anything, Trudy? Dion, you don't have anything because you just got here. Norman, you don't have anything because you're leaving. I do have something. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. You can say something.
It's been an honor. It didn't end the way I wanted it to. I had some things in my life that just took priority. But I did enjoy it. It was a wonderful experience, and hopefully when things settle down, I can revisit it. Absolutely. But I did enjoy it, and I hate that I didn't end the way I started.
Well, here's the thing. You came in at the right time. You were great in helping guide the city the time that you were here, and we appreciate that. I'm very happy for you that you're, from a job standpoint, you got to do something that you're enjoying and that has really taken off. Because family is always important, and to be able to support them is paramount.
They're
You're always welcome to come back.
and there's always committees. We've got committees that
We got P and Z and BOA. And
yeah,
we're gonna need help in a
we're
lot
gonna
of
need
different
help.
places.
And it's not as demanding, but yet it is helpful. And not only that, we can still rely on you just to call you up and say, hey,
Yep.
Can you guide us on this? Or especially with the food trucks, that would be, tremendous amount of help if you would allow us to use you as a sounding board on some things.
Sure. Anything I can do, then I can do it.
call you the godfather, ST.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, and thank you for your commitment.
Daniel, you got anything? You know, it's always worth looking at. I'm a fan of them. The only thing I want to make sure is that when we explore that option, we don't offend those that are already trying to establish that. There's one that's kind of intermittent up there at Jackie Pullen's place that's directly across from King's Bridge. I don't want to offend those that have already tried or have something. I know that the Chisholm Country School has also kind of got a limited farmer's market. But if we're able to do something that's really good, then let's do it. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. We can talk about that moving forward. That's it, guys. I don't have anything. Seeing that we have met everything on the agenda, it's
Could I say, I'm sorry. I just wanted to let you all know that I have put on our website that we're taking applications for BOA and
Oh, yes.
P&Z. We have been having trouble with it, so if you know anybody who might want to apply.
so we need them for both.
We need them for both.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I have somebody in mind that I think would love to serve in one or the other.
Great.
All right, guys, it's 8:19. Meeting adjourned.
Okay.